All right, if you take a look at the answers to your limiting reactant kitchen chemistry problems, you can see how each ingredient gives you a certain number of cookies. Now the question is, once you have all of these answers and you've shown the fraction work to get these answers, which of these answers is the real answer? You might be tempted to add up all the cookies and get a super big number of cookies. But the problem is we're going to run out of some of these ingredients before we are able to finish the recipe. So even though we have 8 cups of flour and that makes 108 cookies, and we have 6 eggs and that also is enough to make 108 cookies, you only have 3 cups of brown sugar, and that's going to limit you to 54 cookies. And even worse than that, we have only a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of baking powder, and that's going to stop you at 36 cookies. So at this point you can only make 36 cookies, but once you get down to the cup of chocolate chips, you only have enough chocolate chips to make 18 cookies. And that's why that is the actual answer in this case. So that is what we refer to as the theoretical yield. So in theory, we should be able to make 18 cookies. The reason for that is we run out of chocolate chips. So that right there, the chocolate chips, would be considered the limiting reactant. So the 3 example problems we're going to do in just a bit, some of them might ask you what is the limiting reactant, and that is simply the reactant that limits how much product you can make. So in this case, it's the chocolate chip cookies. They might ask you what is the theoretical yield. So given a whole bunch of numbers, however many starting ingredients they give you, you're going to have to do the problem that many times. And based on that, whichever one gives you the smallest answer, that's going to be your theoretical yield. Another thing they might ask you is what is the percent yield? So we know that life doesn't always work out perfectly. Let's say a sibling comes along and eats some of your cookie batter. Maybe one of your cookies falls off the counter and your dog eats it. And let's say at the end you can actually only make 15 cookies. So that would be called your actual yield. Now, normally we get that actual yield from going back to the lab and actually getting a measurement. But for these problems, I'm actually going to tell you what the actual yield is in the problem. But normally we get that from the lab. So let's say the actual yield is actually only 15 cookies. Well, we can turn that into a percent by comparing it to the theoretical yield. Which in this case is 18 cookies. So that's our fraction. If you do the math for that, it should be about 80%. So 15 divided by 18, that'll be 5/6. So 83.3%, we'll just round that to 83%. That's 83%. percent yield. So this is really a nice overview, just using some real life math of all three answers they could ask you for in the next three example problems. So you've got the limiting reactant, the reactant that runs out first or limits your product. You've got the calculated answer, which is in theory what you can make. That's the theoretical yield. And if they give you an actual yield to compare that to, then you could calculate the percent yield.